welcome back to Broken and Brilliant. I'm Carrie O'Toole with Carrie O'Toole Ministries, and I'm joined again by Melinda Cadwallader. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
And today we have a special guest, Amy Thedinga. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you bet. So, Amy, you and I met, the first time I think we met was on Angie Austin's radio program. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I had ever been on the radio. Had you been on before?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we were both newbies.
Yep.
And we were the two guests sitting there. It's like, hi.
Yeah.
Hi. How are you? Good. And I heard a little bit about your story. And from that time, we kind of connected,
Yeah,
I think.
For sure.
So, you know, as we were starting these podcasts, I was thinking about different guests I'd like to have on at some point. And I was like, ooh, I've got to have Amy on because you've got quite some stories to share.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so as those of you watching know, we're called Broken and Brilliant, kind of sharing stories about times in people's lives that have really been difficult. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know about you, but I don't know too many people who just, they're born and life is so happy and they die and woo, way to go. You know, life's typically got some bumps.
For sure.
And mountains and deep crevices and things like that. So I know you have experienced some things like that too. Is there a particular story that you're thinking about that you'd like to share today?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot that I could share. I've had a lot of bumps, as you put them, but in keeping with the nature metaphor, I would compare a time that I went through a couple of years ago to being hit by crashing waves. And they just kept coming. I would stand up and just barely get my feet underneath me, and then another one would come. And
you're trying to get a breath, and it's like the next one plows you over before you can even get your footing and catch the full breath.
Yep. And so what happened was I was pregnant with my third child, and I would compare myself to the typical American mom, you know, taking my kids to school and going to soccer practice and doing the stay-at-home mom thing. My husband worked a lot of hours, and I didn't really feel good through my pregnancies. I had a lot of emotional problems, some pretty serious depressions, and most of my life struggled with on and off fluctuating levels of anxiety. But when I was pregnant, and especially shortly after my pregnancies, I would have this spike in depression and anxiety.
So like postpartum kind of stuff.
Right.
And,
I didn't know. I actually finally went and saw a doctor when my first child was 18 months old, and she was like, duh, you're depressed, as I was having these thoughts. And
so what was that like? I mean, can you describe that just a little bit? Because I bet there are a lot of women who suffer with this and maybe don't even know what it is. What was it for you?
It was what I've come to understand, and you'll understand this in like counselor speak, but what I've come to understand, that there's a term for it, is called foreshortened future. Like foreboding thoughts, and just not ever thinking that life was going to get better, or that life was going to be good again.
You can't see past the circumstances of today.
And just a darkness, you know, just a feeling of like impending doom, hopelessness, and just waking up in the morning and just counting the minutes so I can go back to bed again, and not even sleeping when I do go to bed, not having like restful sleep, but just feeling bad.
I think it's so interesting too how those three seem to go together, because I struggled with all three at the same time: depression, anxiety, and sleeplessness. They all feed into each other and play off each other, and it's
in the middle of the night, you know, when nobody's around and the sun's not shining, so lights are off, it's like, you know, those thought cycles just come at you, and it seems so real. And so you can have so many people tell you, you know, there's nothing wrong with your life, just snap out of it. And
you finally have this child that you've always wanted.
Right. And so all three of my children are 2 years and 9 months apart. And so right when I would start kind of getting my feet underneath me, and these weren't the waves I was talking about, my children.
One kid
after the other one. But it turned out like I would be breastfeeding and have all these hormonal craziness, and then I would get pregnant again. And, you know, then it would start the cycle all over again. And at one point, between my first and my second, I actually started taking medication. And that didn't, I would say it took the edge off of my suffering, but it didn't do anything to make me feel like life was good again. You know, it just kind of numbed me out to where I wasn't...
it wasn't putting you on a path towards...
destruction.
Or towards the hope and towards the moving forward. It was just kind of sufficing what was going on.
Right. It gave me... it helped me, struggle through. Or, you know, it gave me it kind of got me above the edge of like wanting to die. I mean,
well, and I always say that, you know, I do believe there's a place for medication and a season possibly for medication, and because chemical imbalances do happen, and it can get you up from the depths so that you're not threatened with self-harm or something like that. But without working it through,
there's no
you just
healing.
sit on that. Yeah, there's no healing.
Yeah, and that's the reason I went on the medication is because I was working at the time, and I had dropped my son off at his care place, and I was driving on my way to an appointment, and a semi was coming on the oncoming traffic, and I was in my car, and I was just like, you know,
I know exactly what you're going to say.
If I could just veer over into this lane, I would, you know, I could just, the suffering would be over. Like, I could just be done. And that scared me, because I wouldn't say I was suicidal where I was afraid that I was going to do something. You weren't
plotting and thinking of how to do it, but the opportunity was
there.
But
it was just like, I had that thought, and, you know, I fully believe it was the enemy just being like,
the whispers of relief.
Yep.
Yes.
Just take yourself out. You know, just stop trying. Just give up.
It'll never get better.
Never get better. Exactly. Yeah. And that, at that point, that kind of, that was a little bit of a wake-up call for me to go see the doctor and be like, okay, this isn't normal. You know, this isn't just normal baby blues, whatever. And like I said, at that time, my son was 18 months old, so I wasn't a brand new mother. But what I also found is that there are so many other mothers that feel that same way, especially stay-at-home moms. You know, they feel like they've lost their sense of purpose, they've lost their sense of identity, and they just are going through the motions of life. So that, in one way, you know, it kind of makes you feel better to know that you're not alone. But on the other hand, it kind of lets you know that there's a widespread problem, and it gives you this sense of, well, this is how motherhood is.
Right.
You know, like this is just how it is. So you don't have that drive to get better.
Well, and I think too, when your kids are really tiny still, they're not involved in anything yet. You're not meeting other moms necessarily, so you do feel totally isolated. It's a little different when they're in elementary school or whatever.
Absolutely. And you do, I can speak only for myself, but I do isolate when I'm feeling, when I'm struggling. I push everybody out, and
which is the worst thing we can do, but
crawl into a hole and just, you know, stew in my suffering. And that's not a healthy thing, but that's just kind of my method of operation. So here I am, and I had a few other kind of nagging physical symptoms that played into this. I had like knots up and down my shoulders and real tight necks and daily headaches. I was taking about 600 milligrams of ibuprofen every single day. And not, you know, when I was pregnant it was Tylenol, but still I was just in pain. My knees hurt, my hips hurt, and my joints were stiff, and I had some pretty serious digestive problems.
And you're fairly young, so those are the things that they're not normal for someone your age who's young and vibrant and has 3 children. You've just gone through labor 3 times. That's, you know, your body's capable of much. So those signs and symptoms, it's not natural. It's not normal.
It isn't. Melinda, you make a great point, and I know the perspective that you're coming from, and I totally see that and agree with it now. But at the time, I talked to so many other people, and they were like, oh yeah, me too. And so it was just like...
That normalizes it.
Yeah, it normalizes it, and it doesn't make you want to strive or even look for something
I think
better.
you just resign.
Yeah.
I guess this is what my life's going to be the next 18 years.
Let's just survive and not thrive.
Right, exactly.
Let's just survive. That's all.
Survival
and
mode.
don't you look at other people who seem to kind of have it together, and you just are like, I guess I'm just not one of those people.
And that's that is such a good point, because so many people during that time, now that I've been telling my story more publicly, have just been like, I had no idea. I thought you had it all together. Like, I am a hot mess. You know, like, you have no idea. You know, so you never know, like, what's going on behind the veil.
Well, and you see somebody for 5 minutes. That's not a good indicator of their entire life.
Right. So here I was, you know, pregnant with my third child, not feeling good, not knowing for sure what to do about it, or really even aware that anything was available to me. And I had my third child, and came home from the hospital. Everything was fine, we thought. I woke up about 3 days after he was born. It was my, I think it was my second night home, 3 days after he was born. He was 3 days old. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I couldn't breathe. It was like an elephant was sitting on my chest. And I woke up my husband. I couldn't even get a full enough breath to really say any words. Yeah, I just, you know, shook him. And so we had, you know, obviously 3 young children. So he arranged emergency transportation for me to the hospital. And I'm thinking the whole way there, I'm panicking, because you know how that feeling is when, I don't know if you've ever had a feeling when you've been underwater or you can't get breath, and that is such, and then you want to hyperventilate. So I was sitting there on the whole ride to the hospital, just trying to get enough breath to calm myself down and have enough breath to breathe, you know, and it was terrifying. But I was thinking my lungs would gurgle on the way, you know, so I was thinking, well, I have pneumonia, or I've got some
that's what I was thinking.
So I was kind of thinking that along those lines. When I get there and we pull up to the emergency entrance, and like there's a gurney and they're doing all this stuff. It's like a scene out of like ER, Grey's Anatomy. I'm like, this is a lot of drama for bronchitis.
Just having a little bit of trouble breathing.
They're not talking to me. They're like stabbing things in my arms and just, you know, flurry of activity testing. And finally they got me stabilized and I started breathing again. And I was like, oh, you know, you fixed me. So the doctor comes in, he sits down, and he's got that, you know, like that look on his face. And he says, Amy, you're in congestive heart failure. And I was like, no,
Now, how old were you?
I was 36. And this is something that happens to 75-year-olds, you know, like above. It's when your heart starts giving out, basically. And I was just like, no, you don't know. I'm 36. I've got a 3-day-old infant, 2 young children. No. And so he went on to explain the diagnosis. And it's something, I won't bore you with the medical details. I don't fully understand them myself. But it's something called peripartum cardiomyopathy. And it is
Thanks for not going any farther than that.
You're welcome. It's basically the heart tissue is damaged by pregnancy. They don't know why. And the prognosis is extremely bad. It's got a 50% mortality rate generally. So,
wow.
Yeah, within 5 years. And then beyond that, the people that do survive it end up, you know, on a transplant list, medications the rest of their lives. You know, the people with the heart patients. With a mask and dragging their oxygen tank along, and it's a very, very severe, serious diagnosis. And I mean, you know, have you ever had that feeling where it's just like the room just starts
reality sort of
like,
gets
wake up,
I'm
I'm in a nightmare, wake up. And so they transferred me to intensive care. And it just kept going. You know, the doctors would come in, and the cardiologists would come in, and they were just like, yeah, you know, this is very bad, very bad. And so at that moment, I would say, I look back on it, and it is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. But it's also the best thing that's ever happened to me. I can say that now because I'm well, I'm healed.
Yeah, but you're not right in the middle of it.
I'm not right in the middle of it. Right. But in that moment, I knew what people go through when they get the cancer diagnosis or the, you know, the heart disease diagnosis, which is what I got, or, you know, something that is in your body that's threatening to lay claim to your life. You know, and it's such a hopeless, powerless feeling. And you're just begging for somebody to come along and be like, that's not that bad.
Wake you up.
You're misdiagnosed. It's not. But specialist after specialist concurred and, confirmed the diagnosis over and over again. And it came to, they medicated me to get the fluids off of my lungs, and then it basically came down to a waiting game. So they sent me home, and they were like, you might pull out of this. We won't know anything for another 21 days. We're just going to monitor.
So pulling out of it meaning your heart will recover, or are you talking the hope, different avenues of treatment or transplant? Was that an option? What kind of?
They didn't. That is an option in certain circumstances, but they have to find out what the heart's gonna do. And it was too soon.
So they needed to calm it down and see after it was given a chance to rest or whatever. What
and
it was
as my
do.
body healed, from pregnancy and birth and stuff, to see kind of what was gonna happen. And so for 21 days, I sat in that place that we just talked about, only I already had this anxiety going, and this was
let's
throwing
just put a little fuel on that fire.
So the last thing my heart needed, I would lay awake in bed and just rest my hand on my chest and just be like, is my heart still beating? I would take my pulse. Is my heart still beating? Is it? And I wasn't really at risk for cardiac arrest. That's not what the, that's not what but that's what you
don't
think,
know.
So, then we went through that, and, a couple of months after that, so this was in October, my son's birthday, and then in January of that same year, 3 months to the day, on the 17th, I got a call on a Tuesday morning. Just like any other, my kids were watching Sesame Street. I was cleaning cereal up off the floor, and my sister called, and just out of the blue, my dad had woken up that morning and had a massive heart attack and died. And here was this was a unique set of circumstances, because he wasn't overweight, he didn't have high cholesterol, he didn't have high blood pressure, he had regular checkups. Nobody knew. This was out of the blue. And all along this process, as I was having my follow-up care and the initial diagnosis, they kept asking me, do you have any history in your family of heart disease? And I was,
not that I know
my
of.
answer was no grandparents, no parents, no siblings, no aunts, uncles, we're all healthy. So that changed everything for me at that, at that moment.
Well, it changes it for you physically and all of that, and you just lost your dad.
And I just lost my dad. It was just, it was the timing and the circumstances were crazy. But what all of this did really was, it was like that catalyst for me to be like, in that moment in the hospital, I was like, I want to live.
Yeah.
I want to live. And I get emotional thinking about it because, just a couple of years prior, I was thinking about driving my car in front of a semi. And so in that hospital room, amid a flurry of panicked prayers, I was just telling God, if you will let me get through this, if you will heal me, if you will give me my body back, I will be healthy. I will not take my life for granted. I will live my life. I will love my life. I will thrive. I will find out what it means. I will take the steps necessary that I have to take to claim my life and be healthy and be a mother to my children and fulfill my purpose on the earth. And then my dad died at 64 years old, and I realized, it gets real. I realized he's not going to fulfill his purpose, and he's not going to see his grandchildren grow up, and so that was the crystallizing and the hardening of my resolve. And but I was still in that moment I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do about it.
You made the decision, but knowing what to do to make that all happen.
Something completely different. Yeah. It's two different modalities.
But you have to have that decision first.
Right. And that's that brings back so much for me, because I had the same prayer in my experience with my daughter in the hospital with cancer. I had lived the last couple years of just the whirlwind of having a nanny and 2 working parents and the whole jive of life that was so fast-paced that we weren't even aware that she was sick until it was 98% of her body. And then in the hospital, my prayer to God was, give me a second chance to be the mother I never was, who I wasn't aware and alert and awake to my children. I promise I want to be that mom. I want to know what it means to be a mother. I want to... So that whole prayer, I'm like, I get that. Yeah. That is those moments of... it's the crossroad of who are you going to be? How are you going to live? And then making a decision to stand for something.
Right.
Yeah. And I do think, when you said a little bit ago, you hear this a lot and it sounds just crazy to say it was the worst moment of my life, but it was also the best.
Yeah.
How could it be the best? But you start going, if this had not happened, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to know what I know now. And sometimes it does take something so earth-shattering to wake us up or help us see that there's more, because we can be so satisfied just with,
with survival, with just surviving.
Not even satisfaction or contentment, like in its true sense, but just white knuckling. I call it white knuckling through the, just getting. And I was, like you said, I wasn't mothering. I was babysitting alongside of my children. They were fed, they were bathed, they were taken to the places needs. Where they needed to be taken. But I was not mothering. I wasn't engaging them. I wasn't knowing them and letting them know me. Yeah. And that, that all changed in this whole transition. I'm by no means perfect at it, but I have a completely different perspective on mothering and on life in
your
general.
Heart changed literally in the middle of that. And it's not like you were a mean, nasty person, but there was just some stuff in there that was kind of not being dealt with.
Those are the moments that I refer to as matriarchal moments. Those are the moments where you decide to, I'm going to stand as a mother, or even if I don't have children, I'm going to be someone of influence. I'm going to lead a life that has purpose and value and
meaning, and not just for me and what I'm going through, but what I can do for other people, whether they be the little precious, tender hearts under my care or the world at large. And that's really what all this has led into for me.
Well, I just want to say thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing such a difficult time with us. And we are going to leave you hanging just a little bit because we're going to come back and share with you, so what did you do and where are you at now and how did you find these resources and what in the world? I mean, you changed your life from really the brink of death to a thriving, wonderful young woman here today. So
without knowing or hearing about what we're going to talk about in our next podcast, for the woman or man or father,
anybody
who was where you were just surviving and knowing that things weren't great, but maybe you were just pacifying that.
Yeah.
What would you say to them before you go into your story of hope and redemption and where you are now? What would you say to them at this point?
Oh, that is my life's message. There is more. Things can be better. No matter where you are, no matter what you're going through, it will pass and it will get better as long as you make the decision and have the belief that things can get better.
Well, and even things like you're talking about, because I grew up believing, I mean, there are certain things that you can control and there are certain things that you can't control. And obviously we cannot control the weather. If you're swept up in a tornado, you can take precautions, but you cannot control certain things. Right. But there are things that I did not believe I had control over that I started to understand. There are things I can do, and you're not just a victim of circumstances or genes or heredity or your environment or whatever.
And even when you can't control the circumstances, you can always control what the circumstances mean to you. Like when you're laying in the hospital and you're getting that diagnosis, it can either mean my life is over, this is it, I'm just giving up, or it can mean, oh, I'm a fighter, I'm going to fight through this, I'm going to make sure that God uses this for good in the world. And
so your response is what you can control.
Well, and I just want to say one other thing too, because I know that there are people and they fought with everything they had. They did everything well and still they died.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it happened. So I don't want people to hear, this is not, we're not name it and claim it. We're not, you just speak it and it will be. Right. We're not God.
Right.
We can't control everything. But so many more times, I think we can do things than we give ourselves I just think that we live as victims. Our whole country, our whole world, we live as victims a lot. And we want to encourage people that there are things you can do.
Well, it's like that. I forget who he was, but he was a Mexican general or warrior of some type, and he said, "I'd rather die on my feet than on my knees." So even if you do go through and you fight to the end and you die, and that's the path that God has for you, at least you didn't give up. That to me is the only failure in life, is just the laying down. And I'm not talking about a surrendering.
Right.
I'm talking about
because that is
taking yourself out.
Right. Yeah. Because a lot of times people do need to give up because they're holding
surrender,
on. It's such a crazy thing, but I hope we can understand, and let's explore that a little bit more next time too, because I think I'm really looking forward to hearing, okay, well, what happened? What did you do? So we'll leave you with that cliffhanger. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Carrie and Melinda.
You bet. Thank you, Melinda. And we will see you next year here on Broken and Brilliant.